Ethan was a man from Earth, traveling far beyond the stars. His mission had been difficult, filled with danger, but it had led him here, to this alien world, a world unlike any he had ever imagined. The people of this world, beings of advanced technology and strange power, had been watching him, studying him. They had seen his courage, his intelligence, and his ability to adapt to the unknown. Now, they wanted to reward him. He stood before the Council of Aliens, an intimidating group of towering figures. Their bodies shimmered with strange colors. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light. Yet, despite the fearsome appearance of the council, Ethan stood tall, his mind calm, knowing that this moment would change his life forever. "You have completed your task with honor, Earthling," the leader of the council said in a voice that echoed through the chamber. "You have earned a great reward." Ethan nodded, trying to keep his face neutral. He had heard rumors about the rewards the aliens gave to those they deemed worthy, but he had never imagined something like this. The leader's next words stunned him. "You may choose one or two women, both captured from different worlds. They will be yours, to do with as you please. One is a warrior, the other an intellectual. Choose wisely." Ethan looked at the two women standing before him. They were chained, but their postures remained proud. The warrior, tall and strong, had fiery red eyes and a muscular frame that spoke of her warrior training. She wore armor made of an alien material, its sharp edges glinting in the light. The other woman, smaller but no less commanding, had piercing blue eyes and delicate features. Her clothes were simple, but her aura radiated intelligence and wisdom. She stood calmly, though the chains on her wrists hinted at the captivity she had suffered. The choice was a difficult one. Ethan knew what the council expected. They wanted him to choose, to pick one woman to be his companion. But he had never been one to follow orders blindly. These women were not prizes, not objects to be won. They were beings with their own lives, their own stories, their own desires. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward. He had made up his mind. "I choose both," he said firmly. A murmur rippled through the council, and for a moment, the room was silent. The leader's glowing eyes narrowed in surprise. "You asked for both," the leader repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "That is not the way of our people. You must choose. It is tradition." Ethan met the leader's gaze without fear. "Tradition is not always the right path. These women are not for me to own. They are free beings, and I will not choose one over the other. They are both strong, both valuable. If I am to be rewarded, I ask for both of them, not as prizes, but as partners." The council remained quiet, their thoughts hidden behind their alien expressions. Ethan's heart raced. He had expected resistance, but he had never imagined they would consider rejecting his request. He glanced at the women again. The warrior's eyes met his, filled with something he couldn't place: curiosity, hope. The intellectual woman, too, looked at him, her gaze softer but equally intense. The leader turned to the other council members, their forms glowing as they discussed Evan's request in their own strange language. Time seemed to stretch on as Ethan waited, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the leader turned back to him. "You asked for a great deal, Earthling," the leader said slowly, "but your words hold merit. We have seen your strength and your courage, but we must test you, if you wish. To have both women, you must prove that you can handle such a responsibility. We will set trials for you, test to see if you are truly worthy." Ethan nodded, not hesitating. "I am ready." The leader's gaze softened just slightly. "Very well, you shall have them, but only if you pass the trials. You will face challenges that test not just your strength, but your mind, your heart, and your soul. The path will not be easy, and there is no guarantee of success." Ethan stood tall, a sense of determination flowing through him. He had faced many trials in his life, but none like this. This was not just about survival. It was about understanding, compassion, and proving that he was more than just a conqueror. He could do this for himself, for the women, and for the future they could all share. The leader nodded, and with a wave of his hand, the chains that held the women vanished. They stood free, but still wary, their eyes never leaving Ethan. "You are free to go. But remember," the leader said, his voice grave, "the trials will begin soon. You must choose how you wish to approach them. But be warned, each decision will shape the future of your bond with these women. Choose wisely." Ethan turned to the two women. He could feel the weight of the moment settle upon him. He had made a choice that would forever alter his path, and now it was time to move forward. He could feel their eyes upon him, waiting for his next move. "We will face this together," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You are not prizes, and I will not treat you as such. We are partners in this, and we will succeed together. I promise." The warrior woman nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. The intellectual woman, though more reserved, also gave him a small, thoughtful smile. Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, but he felt ready for whatever came next. The council faded into the background, their forms slowly disappearing as Ethan and the two women left the chamber. Together, they walked into the unknown, the trials of the future waiting for them. But no matter what lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for certain: this journey would change them all, in ways they could never have imagined. The sun of the alien world set, casting an eerie red light across the vast landscape. Ethan stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, staring down at the valley below. It was quiet now, but he could feel the weight of the trials ahead. The council had made it clear that to prove his worth, he would have to pass their test challenges that would push him to his limits. And they had given him no choice but to face them with the two women. By his side, the warrior woman, whose name was Kayla, stood beside him, her gaze sweeping across the horizon, alert and ready for anything. Her muscles were tense, as though she was waiting for danger to strike. The intellectual woman, named Alira, was quieter, her eyes focused on a small device she held in her hand. It seemed to glow softly, projecting some kind of map or data. Ethan turned to Alira, curious. "What is that?" "It's a map of the trials," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "The first trial is a test of endurance. We'll have to cross the Valley of the Forgotten, a place filled with dangerous terrain and wild creatures. The council believes we can't survive it, but I think we can." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of determination rise within him. The council had warned him that this journey would not be easy, but he had never backed down from a challenge. "How do we begin?" "We'll follow the map," Alira said, pointing to the device in her hand. "It's not a straight path. We'll have to avoid the creatures in the valley, and we can't afford to make any mistakes." Kayla grunted. "Creatures are easy to handle. I'll take care of them." Ethan exchanged a glance with her. Her confidence was unwavering, but he knew that this journey would require more than just strength. Kayla was a warrior, skilled in combat, but Alira was the strategist. Together, they were a team, and it was up to him to lead them through the trials. They began their journey down the rocky cliff, moving cautiously toward the valley below. The air was thick with tension as they descended into the unknown. The landscape around them was alien and unfamiliar, with towering cliffs, jagged rocks, and strange plants growing in the shadows. Ethan could hear the distant calls of creatures, their voices echoing through the valley like whispers in the wind. As they approached the valley's edge, Alira stopped. She looked down at her device, her brow furrowed in thought. "This is where the map becomes unclear," she said, her voice low. "We need to be careful." Kayla's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her weapon, a blade made of a strange metal that gleamed in the dim light. "I don't fear the unknown," she said. "We'll deal with whatever comes our way." Ethan felt a surge of admiration for her courage, but he knew that raw strength alone wouldn't be enough. "We need a plan. Let's stay together and move slowly. If we face anything dangerous, we'll deal with it as a team." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, taking in the landscape before them. Then they stepped forward, carefully making their way into the valley. The path was rocky and uneven, forcing them to step cautiously as they descended into the shadowed depths below. The valley seemed to stretch on forever. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath their feet became slick with strange, glowing moss. They moved cautiously, with Kayla taking the lead. her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Alira followed closely behind, her device still glowing, guiding them through the maze of rocks and shadows. Hours passed, and the trio made their way deeper into the valley. Ethan's muscles ached from the constant movement, but he refused to let fatigue slow him down. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not with Kayla and Alira depending on him. Suddenly, Kayla stopped. "I hear something," she said, her voice tense. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he looked around. The valley had been eerily quiet, but now he could hear something too. A rustling noise came from the shadows, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Something was moving toward them. Kayla crouched low, readying herself for combat. Alira raised her device, her eyes focused as she studied the readings. "It's not showing up on the map," she said. "Whatever it is, it's not normal." Ethan motioned for them to move back. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice steady. They quickly backed into the shadows of the rocks, pressing their bodies against the cold stone. The rustling grew louder, and then, out of the shadows, emerged a massive creature. Its skin was covered in scales that shimmered in the dim light, and its eyes glowed an eerie yellow. It stood on four legs, its claws scraping the ground as it moved. Its jaws were wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to glow with a sickly green light. Kayla's eyes lit up with excitement. "A beast," she said, her voice filled with adrenaline. She pulled her weapon from its sheath and stepped forward. "Ready to fight." "Wait," Ethan said, his hand on her shoulder. "This isn't just about fighting. We need to think." Kayla hesitated, glancing back at him. "What do you mean?" "We don't know if this creature is a part of the trial," Ethan explained, "but if we just fight it, we might make things worse. Let's try to avoid it and move around it." Alira nodded. "We can't afford to waste time fighting unless we have to. There might be more creatures ahead." Ethan glanced at the creature again. It was slowly moving toward them, sniffing the air with a low growl. He knew that they had to act quickly. He motioned for them to move toward the left, where the rocks were more scattered and offered better cover. They moved in silence, carefully avoiding the creature's gaze. Kayla, though clearly eager to fight, followed Ethan's lead. As they crept past the creature, it turned its head, sensing their movement. The air was thick with tension as it watched them, its glowing eyes narrowing. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Ethan let out a quiet breath of relief. "That was close," he said, looking back at the others. Kayla smiled, though there was a hint of disappointment in her expression. "Next time, I'll fight it." Alira, who had been focused on her device, glanced up at Ethan. "You made the right decision," she said. "We need to keep moving." Ethan nodded, and they continued on, the silence of the valley pressing down on them. They didn't know what else awaited them, but they would face it together. This was just the beginning of their journey, and already Ethan could feel the weight of the trials ahead. As the three of them moved forward, their bond began to grow. They were no longer strangers, but partners, each learning to trust the others in their own way. And as the valley stretched on, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what the next challenge would bring. The Valley of the Forgotten had become even darker as the trio continued their journey. The air was thick, and the ground beneath their feet grew more uneven with each step. Ethan could feel the pressure of the trials weighing on them, but he remained focused. They had made it past the first challenge with their lives, but he knew the worst was yet to come. Kayla was still on edge, her hand always resting on the hilt of her blade, ready to fight. Ethan could understand why. She was a warrior, trained for battle, and her instincts told her that danger was always lurking. Alira, on the other hand, was more reserved, her focus on the device she carried. It glowed faintly, showing them the path, but it wasn't enough to completely guide them through the ever-changing terrain of the valley. Ethan glanced at the two women walking beside him. He could feel the tension between them, an unspoken conflict that had been building ever since the trial began. Kayla and Alira were different in so many ways. Kayla's strength and directness were clear, while Alira's intellect and caution were equally vital. But as much as they needed each other, they hadn't yet found a way to truly work together. Kayla, frustrated by the slow pace, broke the silence. This isn't going to work. We're moving too slowly. Alira glanced at her. Patience is key. We need to move carefully if we want to avoid the dangers ahead. We're not here to avoid danger, Alira, Kayla snapped. We're here to face it, to fight it. Ethan stepped in before things could escalate. Kayla, we need to be smart about this. We can't just charge through every obstacle. The trials aren't just about strength. They're about strategy, too. Kayla's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Alira, however, looked thoughtful. Ethan's right. If we rush into things, we might miss something important. The map shows a clearer path up ahead, but it's more dangerous. There might be creatures or worse traps set by the council. Kayla grunted in annoyance, but reluctantly slowed her pace. They continued walking, the quiet tension between them growing with every step. The landscape around them had become more treacherous, with jagged rocks and narrow paths that seemed to stretch endlessly. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The temperature dropped, and the air grew colder. The valley was alive with strange sounds, echoes of creatures moving in the darkness. The map showed a bend ahead, a fork in the path where they had to choose whether to move toward the right, where the terrain was more stable, or the left, which appeared to lead into a dense forest of towering alien trees. Ethan stopped and looked at the map again. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Kayla was ready to move forward, but Alira seemed uncertain. What do you think? Ethan asked, turning to Alira. Which way should we go? Alira studied the map carefully, her fingers moving over the device. The right path looked safer, but the left might hold more opportunities. The forest could provide shelter, but it could also hide more dangers. The council could be testing us. Kayla scoffed. We don't need shelter. We need to keep moving. Ethan glanced at her. We need more than just speed, Kayla. We need to think this through. Kayla didn't reply, but the frustration was clear on her face. She wanted action, wanted to prove herself in battle. But this wasn't about fighting. This was about making decisions that would affect their journey and their survival. Ethan took a deep breath. We'll go left. We'll stay close together and keep alert. If there are dangers, we'll deal with them as they come. We need to stay focused on the bigger picture. Kayla gave him a sharp look but nodded. Alira also agreed, though she was still cautious about the unknowns ahead. The three of them made their way toward the forest, moving carefully through the dense underbrush. The trees around them were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, tall, with glowing leaves that flickered like distant stars. The air was thick with the scent of alien plants, and the shadows beneath the trees seemed to shift with a life of their own. As they moved deeper into the forest, the tension between Kayla and Alira remained. The warrior woman kept her hand on her weapon, scanning the surroundings with a practiced eye. Alira, on the other hand, kept her focus on the path ahead, her mind working through possible scenarios. Ethan could see that Alira's mind was always racing, always thinking several steps ahead. But Kayla was the opposite. Her instincts were sharp, her body always ready to react. It wasn't long before they heard something moving in the trees. At first, it was just a rustling sound, but then came the growls, deep, low, and ominous. The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood up, and Kayla immediately went on high alert, her grip tightening around her blade. I told you, Kayla said, her voice tight with anticipation. Something's out there. Alira's eyes scanned the area. Stay calm. We need to be smart about this. Ethan stepped forward, signaling for them to hold still. They waited in silence, the air thick with the sound of the creatures moving closer. The growls grew louder, and then, suddenly, the creature appeared from the shadows, a massive beast. Its body covered in thick, spiny armor. It had the head of a reptile, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Its jaws were wide, dripping with saliva as it stalked toward them. Kayla wasted no time. She charged forward, blade raised, but Ethan held up his hand. No, he shouted, his voice sharp. We're not fighting it head-on. Kayla hesitated, her body tense with the urge to strike. But she stopped. Alira raised her device and began scanning the creature, trying to find any weakness. This creature is not natural, she said, her voice calm but filled with concern. It's been enhanced probably by the council. Ethan looked at her, then at Kayla. We can't fight it directly. We need to outsmart it, Kayla growled, under her breath but nodded. They had no choice. This wasn't a battle they could win with strength alone. Ethan quickly surveyed their surroundings, his mind racing. He spotted a large rock formation nearby, a narrow passageway between the rocks. There, he said, pointing. We can use that to trap it. Alira and Kayla followed his lead as they moved toward the rock formation, the creature hot on their heels. The chase was on, but this time they would control the outcome. The chase through the forest was a blur of movement, the sound of heavy breathing and pounding feet mixing with the growls of the creature behind them. Ethan's heart raced as he led the way through the narrow passage between the rocks. The creature was close now, its massive body crashing through the underbrush. Kayla was right behind him, her weapon ready, her every instinct telling her to fight. Alira, though slower, was keeping up, her eyes focused on the narrow passage ahead. The creature was gaining ground. Ethan could hear its claws scraping the ground, and the air around them seemed to vibrate with the creature's anger. He pushed himself harder, urging the others to move faster. They reached the narrow gap between the rocks, just as the creature roared behind them. Go, go, Ethan shouted, motioning for Kayla and Alira to move ahead. Kayla dashed forward, her sword raised, but before she could reach the gap, the creature lunged. It swiped at her with its massive claws, sending her tumbling backward. She hit the ground hard, her breath knocked out of her. Ethan reached for her, but Alira was faster. She grabbed Kayla's arm, pulling her to her feet just as the creature's claws slashed the air where Kayla had been standing. Not again, Kayla snarled, pushing Alira's hand away and jumping to her feet. I'll handle this. No, Ethan shouted, grabbing her arm. We need to move, now. But Kayla pulled away from him, her eyes burning with frustration. I'm not running from this thing. Ethan's mind raced as the creature advanced, its eyes glowing with hunger. He couldn't afford to let them fight each other. The trial was about survival, not strength alone. They had to work together. If they didn't, they would all be caught. We'll fight it together, Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. Kayla, Alira, listen to me. We need to use the rocks to trap it. We'll force it into a corner. Alira, still holding the device, nodded quickly. It's the only way. We can't keep running. Kayla hesitated, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the creature. For a moment, Ethan thought she might refuse. But then, something changed in her eyes. She nodded. Fine, let's do this, together. They scrambled toward the gap in the rocks, the creature only a few paces behind them. Ethan's mind was racing. He could see the way the creature moved, its enormous body slow but powerful. They needed to use the environment to their advantage. Alira, can you get it to follow us? Ethan asked. Alira looked at him, her face tense. I can try. Without waiting for more instructions, Alira quickly moved to the side, drawing the creature's attention. It roared loudly, its eyes narrowing as it focused on her. The creature charged, moving faster than Ethan expected. It was heading straight for Alira. Kayla's grip tightened on her sword. We're not leaving her behind. We're not, Ethan said. Trust me. With a quick motion, Ethan pushed Kayla toward the rocks. Get into position. Kayla ran ahead, taking her place on the far side of the narrow passage. She raised her blade, ready for the creature to charge. Alira, still holding the creature's attention, moved quickly, darting between the rocks and leading the creature straight toward the trap. It followed her without hesitation, its massive body crashing through the forest. Now, Ethan yelled. Kayla leaped into action, rushing forward and taking a position on the other side of the rocks. The creature, unable to change direction, found itself cornered. It roared, its eyes filled with fury as it realized it had been outmaneuvered. Kayla charged forward, her sword raised. The creature turned to face her, its claws swiping at the air. She ducked under the swipe and aimed a quick strike at its side. But the creature was fast. It blocked her attack with its spiny armor, forcing her back. Ethan and Alira quickly moved in, flanking the creature on either side. Together, They began to push the creature back into the corner. Trying to keep it trapped between the rocks, Kayla slashed at the creature again. But this time, the creature swiped its claws toward her. Catching her arm, she stumbled backward, her blade falling from her grasp. Blood oozed from the wound on her arm, and for a moment, Ethan feared she might be seriously hurt. "Kayla!" Alira shouted, rushing to her side. "I'm fine," Kayla said through gritted teeth, her hand clutching her wound. She wasn't giving up. Ethan's mind raced as he saw the creature preparing to strike again. He had to act fast. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Alira, use your device," he shouted. "Find a weakness." Alira quickly adjusted her device, scanning the creature. Her face lit up with realization. "There's a weak point in its armor, near its neck. If we can get it exposed, we'll do it together," Ethan said, gripping his knife tightly. He knew what had to be done. They quickly coordinated their movements. Kayla, though injured, kept the creature's attention focused on her. She ducked and dodged as it swiped at her, buying Ethan and Alira the time they needed. Alira moved to the side, staying close to the creature's blind spot. Ethan waited for the right moment. The creature's movement slowed as it focused on Kayla. That was their chance. Ethan lunged forward, stabbing the creature in the exposed area just below its neck. The creature roared in pain, its eyes flashing with rage. It stumbled backward, but Kayla was ready. She grabbed her sword again, rushing forward with a final, powerful strike to the creature's chest. The creature let out one final, guttural growl before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was their heavy breathing, the aftermath of their hard-fought victory. Ethan looked around at Kayla and Alira, both panting and bruised from the battle. "We did it," Kayla said, wiping blood from her face. Her voice was rough, but there was a hint of respect in her words. Alira, though relieved, looked at Ethan with concern. "That was too close." Ethan nodded, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "We've got to stick together if we're going to make it through this. No more fighting alone." Kayla looked at him, then at Alira. Slowly, she nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." Ethan smiled. "We all have our roles, but we're in this together." With the creature defeated, the three of them stood together, stronger than before. But the trials were far from over. They had earned this victory, but ahead of them, more challenges awaited. And they knew that only by trusting each other could they survive what was to come. The forest was silent after the battle. The creature's body lay still on the ground, its once threatening growls now just an echo in the distance. Ethan, Kayla, and Alira stood together, each catching their breath after the intense fight. They had made it through the first few trials, but they knew that the hardest one was yet to come. The air felt heavier now, as though the valley itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. "We can't stop now," Kayla said, her voice rough but determined. "This is only the beginning." Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. He had felt the weight of their mission from the start, but now it felt even more real. "We've come too far to turn back. Let's keep moving." The map Alira held was still glowing faintly, guiding them toward their next challenge. She checked the device one more time, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "The next test is nearby," she said, her voice calm but serious. "It's called the Trial of Shadows. It's a test of courage and intellect. We have to enter the caves ahead and face whatever lies inside." Kayla cracked her knuckles, a confident smile on her face. "Sounds like a fight to me." "No," Alira said, shaking her head. "This is different. We'll be facing illusions, fears, and distractions. We need to stay focused, or we could end up trapped in the caves forever." Ethan listened carefully, understanding the gravity of Alira's words. The trials weren't just physical tests. They were tests of their minds, their hearts, and their ability to stay true to their goals. He looked at the cave entrance in the distance, its dark mouth waiting for them like an open wound in the landscape. This would be their hardest challenge. "Yet we can do this," he said, his voice steady. "We'll face whatever's inside together." The three of them started walking toward the caves. The ground beneath their feet grew uneven, and the air grew colder as they neared the entrance. Strange noises echoed from within, whispers that seemed to call their names, urging them to enter. It was unsettling, but they didn't slow down. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to let fear stop them now. Once they stepped into the caves, the temperature dropped even more. The walls were slick with moisture, and the path ahead was narrow, winding through rocks that seemed to shift and change with every step. The air smelled damp, like earth and decay, and the whispers grew louder, almost as if the cave itself was alive, feeding off their fear. "This place feels wrong," Kayla muttered, her hand on her sword. Her eyes darted around, her instincts on high alert. "It's just an illusion," Alira said, her voice steady. "We have to ignore it and focus on the path ahead. Keep your mind clear." Ethan nodded, doing his best to block out the unsettling sounds. The cave seemed to shift around them, the walls closing in as if trying to swallow them whole. They had to stay focused. They had to keep moving as they went deeper into the cave. Strange images began to appear in the shadows. First, it was just shapes, flickers of movement, flashes of light, but then the shapes became clearer. Figures appeared in front of them, figures they recognized, people from their past. The illusions took the form of loved ones, enemies, and friends, all calling out to them, urging them to turn back or to stay and fight. Ethan saw his family, his friends from Earth, standing in the shadows. Their faces were distorted with fear and confusion, their voices pleading with him to leave, to come home. He stopped in his tracks, feeling his heart tighten in his chest. Was this real? Was this the trial? Or was it something else? "Ethan," his mother's voice echoed through the cave. "Come back to us. Don't do this. Don't go any farther." Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his mind clear. He knew this wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it felt so real. The pain, the longing. He turned to Kayla, needing something to anchor him to the present. Kayla's face was tight with determination, but her eyes were locked on something in the distance. She didn't flinch when the illusions tried to reach her. Instead, she growled under her breath and moved forward. "Don't listen to them," Kayla said, her voice steady. "They're just shadows. We have a mission. We have to finish what we started." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. He couldn't let himself get lost in the illusions. They were just distractions, and he couldn't afford to be distracted. He forced himself to look away from the vision of his family, focusing instead on the path ahead. He didn't know if they could hear him wherever they were, but he knew one thing: he had to finish this for them, for himself, and for the women who had become his partners in this journey. The voices faded as they pressed forward, but the cave seemed to get darker, more oppressive. The air was thick with something that wasn't quite fear, but it was close. The deeper they went, the harder it became to keep their minds clear. But they kept moving, step by step, toward whatever awaited them in the heart of the cave. Then, suddenly, the path opened up into a vast chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop the pedestal was a glowing crystal, pulsing with energy. It was the final test, Ethan knew. The trial of shadows was over, but it had one last challenge, the choice. Alira stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "This is it," she said softly. "This is the final test." The council said that only the worthy can take the crystal. But it's not just about taking it, it's about what we choose to do with it. Ethan stepped closer, his heart racing. He knew what the crystal meant. It held the power to change everything, to give them the strength they needed to face whatever came next. But it was more than that. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for: their strength, their unity, and their trust in each other. "This is our choice," Ethan said quietly. "What we do next will decide everything." Kayla stepped forward, her eyes locked on the crystal. She didn't hesitate. "Let's take it," she said firmly. "We've come this far. We need it." Ethan looked at Alira, who was still focused on the pedestal. "What do you think?" Alira took a deep breath and nodded. "We take it, but only together." The three of them moved toward the pedestal, their hands reaching out together. As they touched the crystal, a surge of energy flowed through them. The ground shook. and the chamber lit up with a bright light. This was the moment. The final test had begun. The bright light from the crystal filled the chamber, casting strange shadows on the walls. Ethan, Kayla, and Alira stood close together, their hands still touching the glowing surface. The energy from the crystal surged through them, making their bodies tingle with power. It was both overwhelming and calming at the same time, as though they were connected to something greater than themselves. Ethan could feel the strength within the crystal, but more than that, he felt something else, something deeper. The crystal wasn't just a source of power. It was a test, a reminder of the journey they had taken, and of the bond they had forged along the way. The light slowly faded, and the chamber grew quiet once more. The three of them stood in the center, staring at the crystal now resting peacefully. On its pedestal, it was no longer glowing, its power contained, but the air around it still hummed with energy. "Well," Kayla said, breaking the silence. "That was something." Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "We made it," he said softly. "We passed the trial." Alira stepped forward, her eyes still focused on the crystal. "We didn't just pass the trial," she said. "We learned something. The trial wasn't just about the crystal. It was about us, how we work together, how we trust each other." Kayla nodded, her gaze shifting from Alira to Ethan. "I wasn't sure at first. I didn't think we could do it, but I see now. I see how we're stronger together." Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. The weight of the trials had been heavy, but they had made it through. Not just because they were strong, but because they had learned to trust each other, to work together as a team. "We did it," Ethan repeated, his voice filled with pride. But as they stood there, the chamber seemed to shift. The walls began to tremble, and the floor cracked beneath their feet. The crystal pulsed once more, its energy rippling through the air. Ethan's heart raced. The trials weren't over yet. This was the final challenge, the one they had been preparing for from the very beginning. "We need to leave," Alira said, her voice urgent. Now, the ground beneath them shook harder, and the ceiling began to crumble. Rocks fell around them, and the chamber started to collapse. The trials were testing them until the very end, but they were ready. They had faced so much already, and now they just needed to escape. "Come on," Kayla shouted, grabbing both Ethan and Alira by the arms and pulling them toward the exit. The tunnel that had led them into the chamber was blocked, but there was another path, a narrow crack in the wall that led upward. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed Kayla and Alira, climbing through the narrow passage. They had no time to think, no time to question their choices. All they could do was move forward as fast as they could. The sound of rocks falling grew louder behind them. They could feel the heat of the collapsing chamber, the ground shaking beneath them, but they didn't stop. They didn't look back. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to give up now. Ethan's muscles burned from the effort, but he didn't slow down. He could hear Kayla and Alira's footsteps behind him, their breath just as labored as his. They were all in this together. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. The passage opened up into a small, open area, a safe space where the collapsing rocks couldn't reach them. The three of them stopped, gasping for air, their bodies covered in dirt and sweat. But they had made it. Ethan collapsed at his knees, his heart still racing from the escape. Kayla sat down beside him, her breathing heavy but steady. Alira leaned against the wall, her eyes wide but focused. They had survived. "We did it," Kayla said again, this time with more certainty. "We really did it." Ethan looked at her, then at Alira. The trials had tested them in ways they hadn't expected, but they had come out stronger, together. But even as they rested, the sound of distant voices reached their ears. It was the alien council, watching them from afar. They had been observing the trials all along, testing the humans who dared to face their challenges. But Ethan and his companions had proven themselves worthy. They had passed the test of strength, courage, and intellect. And now, it was time for the council to acknowledge their success. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't a threat. The walls of the cave began to glow, and a soft light filled the space. The council appeared before them, their glowing eyes fixed on the three humans. You have done what no one thought was possible. The council leader said, his voice deep and resonant. You have passed the trials. You have shown strength, unity, and wisdom. Ethan stood slowly, his body still aching from the escape. But he stood tall, facing the council without fear. We've earned our reward. We've proven ourselves. The council nodded. Indeed, you have earned more than just a reward. You have earned the right to shape your own future. You may take the crystal with you, and it will grant you the power to change the course of your people's destiny. Ethan felt a surge of pride. The crystal wasn't just a source of power. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. The council's words echoed in his mind, the right to shape their own future. He turned to Kayla and Alira. They had earned this together. They had faced every challenge and come out stronger for it. We've done it, Alira said softly, smile forming on her face. We've earned our future. Kayla grinned, her eyes full of pride. And it's just the beginning. Ethan looked at both of them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Together, he said, we've made it together. And so, with the crystal in their hands, they left the cave behind. The trials were over, but their journey had just begun. The galaxy was vast, and there was so much more ahead of them. But no matter what came next, Ethan knew one thing. They would face it as a team, stronger, united, and ready for whatever the future held.